She was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, a woman who preyed on men along the highways of Florida, shooting them dead and robbing them of their money and belongings. A woman who claimed she acted in self-defense but whose story was riddled with contradictions and lies. A woman who became a media sensation, a feminist icon, and a Hollywood inspiration. Her name was Aileen Wuornos, and this is her story. Between 1989 and 1990, Aileen Wuornos killed 7 men in cold blood. She was arrested in 1991, convicted of 6 murders, and sentenced to death. She spent more than a decade on death row, where she gave numerous interviews, changed her story several times, and eventually confessed to all the killings, saying she wanted to die. She was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, at the age of 46. But who was Aileen Wuornos, and what drove her to become a killer? To answer that question, we have to go back to her childhood, a childhood marked by abuse, neglect, and trauma. Aileen Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her mother, Diane, was only 14 years old when she married Aileen's father, Leo, an 18-year-old convicted sex offender. Diane gave birth to Aileen's older brother, Keith, when she was 15, and to Aileen when she was 16. 2 months before Aileen was born, Diane filed for divorce, and soon after she abandoned her children, leaving them with their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos. Lori and Britta were both alcoholics who legally adopted Aileen and Keith in 1960. Aileen later claimed that her grandfather sexually assaulted and beat her from a young age, and that she also had sexual relations with her brother. She also said that she was raped by a family friend when she was 14 and became pregnant as a result. She gave birth to a boy at a home for unwed mothers and gave him up for adoption. Aileen dropped out of school and ran away from home, living in the woods and surviving by prostitution and petty theft. She hitchhiked across the country, getting into trouble with the law for various crimes such as assault, robbery, forgery, and car theft. She also had several short-lived marriages and relationships, mostly with older men who abused her or exploited her. In 1986, Aileen met Tyria Moore, a hotel maid, at a Daytona Beach gay bar. The two women became lovers and moved in together, traveling around Florida and living off Aileen's earnings as a prostitute. Aileen was fiercely protective of Tyria and often got into fights with her clients or anyone who threatened their relationship. On November 30, 1989, Aileen killed her first victim, Richard Mallory, a 51-year-old electronics store owner who picked her up on Interstate 4. She shot him 4 times with a .22 caliber revolver, dumped his body in the woods, and took his car and money. She later claimed that Mallory had raped and tortured her and that she acted in self-defense. However, no physical evidence of rape was found, and Mallory had no criminal record of violence. He did, however, have a history of mental illness and had spent time in a psychiatric hospital for sexual assault. Over the next year, Aileen killed 6 more men using the same method and weapon. They were David Spears, a 43-year-old construction worker who was shot 6 times and left naked along Highway 19 on June 1, 1990. Charles Cascadon, a 40-year-old part-time rodeo worker who was shot 9 times and left in the woods near Tampa on June 6, 1990. Peter Seams, a 65-year-old retired merchant seaman who was last seen leaving Jupiter, Florida with Aileen on June 7, 1990. His car was found abandoned in Orange Springs on July 4, 1990, with bloodstains and fingerprints matching Aileen and Tyria. His body was never found. Troy Burris, a 50-year-old sausage salesman who was shot twice and left in the woods near Ocala on July 31, 1990. Charles Humphreys, a 56-year-old retired Air Force major, former police chief, and state child abuse investigator who was shot 6 times and left in the woods near Marion County on September 11, 1990. Walter Gino Antonio, a 62-year-old truck driver who was shot 4 times and left near a remote logging road in Dixie County on November 19, 1990. All of these men had picked up Aileen as a prostitute, and all of them had been robbed of their money, belongings, and vehicles. Aileen later claimed that all of them had either raped or attempted to rape her, and that she killed them in self-defense. However, None of them had any history of violence or sexual assault, and some of them had wives, children, or girlfriends who vouched for their character. Aileen Wuornos' killing spree came to an end on January 9, 1991, when she was arrested at a biker bar in Volusia County, Florida, on an outstanding warrant. The police had been tracking her down for months. After finding her fingerprints and palm prints on the victims' cars and belongings, they also had a witness, Tyria Moore, who had fled to Pennsylvania after the last murder and who had been cooperating with the authorities in exchange for immunity. Tyria contacted Aileen by phone several times while the police recorded their conversations. She persuaded Aileen to confess to the murders, saying that it was the only way to save their relationship and avoid the death penalty. Aileen, who was desperate and lonely, agreed to confess and gave a detailed account of each killing, saying that she acted in self-defense. She also expressed remorse and guilt, saying that she hated herself and wanted to die. Aileen was charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of armed robbery. She pleaded not guilty, but later changed her plea to guilty, saying that she wanted to get right with God. She also fired her public defenders and represented herself in court. She was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death by lethal injection. She appealed her convictions and sentences, but they were upheld by the higher courts. Aileen Wuornos spent more than 10 years on death row at the Florida State Prison in Stark. During that time, she gave numerous interviews to the media, the police, and various filmmakers, writers, and activists. She also wrote letters to her friends, family, and supporters, and made several statements to the court and the public. In her interviews and letters, Aileen showed a complex and contradictory personality. She was sometimes calm and coherent, sometimes angry and erratic. She was sometimes remorseful and repentant, sometimes defiant and vengeful. She was sometimes lucid and rational, sometimes paranoid and delusional. She was sometimes charming and humorous, sometimes rude and vulgar. She also changed her story several times, contradicting her own confessions and testimonies. She sometimes admitted to killing the men and sometimes denied it. She sometimes said that she acted in self-defense and sometimes said that she killed them for fun or money. She also made various claims and accusations, some of which were true and some of which were false. She claimed that she was a victim of childhood abuse, rape, domestic violence, and police corruption, which were true. She also claimed that she was a victim of a conspiracy by the police, the courts, the media, and the prison system, which were false. She accused the police of planting evidence, the courts of violating her rights, the media of exploiting her, and the prison system of torturing her. She also accused her former lover Tyria Moore of betraying her and her former lawyer Stephen Glazer of manipulating her. She also expressed various beliefs and opinions, some of which were reasonable and some of which were bizarre. She believed in God but also in aliens, demons, and angels. She supported the death penalty but also opposed it. She hated men but also loved them. She identified as a lesbian but also as a heterosexual. She had a sense of humor but also a sense of despair. She also attracted various attention and support, some of which were genuine and some of which were opportunistic. She was interviewed by famous journalists such as Nick Broomfield and Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer. She was portrayed by famous actors such as Charlize Theron and Monster. She was adopted by famous activists such as Arlene Prowl and The Selling of a Serial Killer. She was befriended by famous celebrities such as Jeb Bush and Overkill, the Aileen Wuornos story. She also became a symbol and a subject of various debates and controversies, some of which were relevant and some of which were irrelevant. She was seen as a victim of society, but also as a menace to society. She was seen as a feminist hero, but also as a feminist nightmare. She was seen as a human being, but also as a monster. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison in Starkey. She was the 10th woman to be executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976, and the second woman to be executed in Florida. On the day of her execution, she gave her last interview to a British journalist, Nick Broomfield, who had made 2 documentaries about her. She told him that she was ready to die and that she had no regrets. She also said that she was being controlled by sonic pressure and that the prison staff had crushed her head like a nut. She declined her last meal and opted for a cup of coffee instead. She also declined to make a final statement to the witnesses and instead uttered these words to the prison chaplain. "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus." June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back. She was then strapped to a gurney and injected with a lethal dose of chemicals. She was pronounced dead at 9:47 a.m. Her body was cremated, and her ashes were spread by a childhood friend in her native Michigan. Aileen Wuornos was a complex and tragic figure who lived a life of violence and pain and died a death of controversy and spectacle. She was a product of her environment, but also a product of her choices. She was a killer, but also a human. She was a monster, but also a woman. This was the story of Aileen Wuornos, the making of a monster.